So welcome to the channel, and in this new playlist we're going to be having a look at another great British classic, the Triumph TR6. And in this episode on the playlist we're going to be looking at how you can set the tracking at home using homemade methods. So why don't you just take your car down the garage shop, pay the dollars, get the car laser aligned, job done. But you, like me, are probably watching this video because you want to be able to do that at home by yourself, when you want, as often as you want. Looking at the specification, I think there's a way. Let's have a look at the science. So a car needs tow-in order to be able to track squarely and straightly. The TR6 specification is 0 to 1.6 millimeters of tow-in. But the question is, over what distance is that 1.6 millimeters? Because as further we go out in terms of the angle, the bigger that becomes. The specification is to the furthest outward points on the tyre. So on my wheel, the furthest outward points on the tyre are 510 millimeters or 51 centimeters apart. So if we do some trigonometry, if we look at 1.6 millimeters over a 510 millimeter distance, that is an angle of 0.18 degrees. So the specification is virtually parallel to 0.18 degrees of tow-in. The challenge is, how am I going to measure that? How can I measure these points at the tyre at its furthest out point? So what I'm going to do is build a frame. If I build a metal frame that can sit underneath the car and then use some all thread to touch these points on the tyre, I can measure at the furthest point and then identify and measure my gap between the tyres, the highest point and the lowest point, to that 1.6 millimeters. So we've got our materials here. Let's have a closer look at what we've got. We've got M8 all thread bar, and I'll be using 16 by 16 by 1 millimeter steel square tube, and that's going to, this piece here is 2.5 meters long. So let's get that chopped up to size. And now, with our materials cut to size, we can get the welder out. Now we've got our finished joint at the end of our rod. We've got our support, so it'll rest on the floor in the correct way, and I've welded on the vertical post, and I've drilled a hole here at 31 centimeters above the floor, which should rest nicely halfway up the tyre. All we need to do now then is repeat the process on the other side, and then we'll have our finished frame. And there is our finished welded frame. If we zoom in so you can have a little bit closer look, what I've done there is I've got the support so it sits flat on the floor. This concrete floor is not quite perfectly flat, but that'll be fine. It'll stop it rocking over. We've got our vertical post, and we've got our hole here for our M8 all thread at 31 centimeters high. So next thing to do is to get the car in and offer that up so we can cut the all thread to size. And there, with our frame in place now, if I put the all thread through, you can see that I probably need about 12-13 centimeters for each side. So let's get that cut to size, get some mounting nuts on, and then we're ready to go. Final design then, with the all thread through, 2 nylock nuts to hold that in position, and I've put a nylock nut in reverse at the end, so we've got a flat surface to butt up against the tyre. So let's get it up against the car and see what we've got. So step one, I've put my frame underneath the car. One thing to note is I've had to just trim slightly down the supporting bracket to get it underneath the car. But managed to do that, and it's still stable, which is good. And I've adjusted the all thread here so it just kisses on the tyre on both sides, so just very slightly touches there. So now I've got my distance 31 centimeters up in the center of the furthest out point on the tyre. So now, without adjusting the all thread, I'm going to move the frame to the front, and we'll see what gap we've got to see if we've got toe in or toe out. So I've got the frame set up on the front of the car here. You can see it's just kissing the tyre in the centre at its furthest out point. And if I come round to the other side of the car, you can see that I've got quite a considerable gap. Now that gap, remember the specification, should be 0 to 1.6 millimeters, okay, either side. I have got a total gap of 15 millimeters. So 1.6 plus 1.6, 3.2. I've got nearly 12 millimeters of toe in more than I should have. And I'm not unduly surprised. It's a brand new rack on this car. It hasn't been adjusted or set previously. So that explains why I've got such a big difference, as I've only been, I set it up initially by eye. So next thing to do then is to look at adjusting the rack. So I've got a 15 millimeter gap. The maximum specification is 3 millimeters. So I've got 12 millimeters to reduce. That's 6 millimeters each side, and for every millimeter I change, in theory it's going to change 2, because as the front of the wheel comes out, the back of the wheel is going to go in. So I need to make a 3 millimeter adjustment on my steering rack. Now I'm fortunate that this car tracks straight and square anyway. The steering wheel is in the right position. It's not pulling to the left or pulling to the right. So what I need to do is take 3 millimeters off each side of the steering rack. If you want to adjust the position of your steering wheel, make it move to the left or to the right to become square, we have to adjust one or the other of the tie rods more or less. And to understand what we need to do, we need a little bit more science. So if we have this condition and we adjust only one wheel, what will happen is, as the wheels try to square themselves up when they drive, your steering wheel will now be moved over to the right. It will be turned right. If we only adjust one wheel on the left-hand side, then as the wheels square up in order to track true, the steering wheel will turn to the left. My steering wheel is in a good position, but I have too much toe in. So what I need to do is adjust my track rods equally so they go out, and hence I can maintain my square steering wheel position. So as I need to decrease the amount of toe in, and because the steering rack is on the front, what I actually need to do is take the tie rods outwards. So what I'm going to do is take the tie rods outwards around 3 millimeters, and as the pitch of the thread is about 1 millimeter each, so I'm going to take it out 3 complete turns of the rack and then measure again. So now with the steering rack adjusted, let's move the car back and forward just to settle the suspension and measure again. So now with the rack on the rear of the front wheel, we've now got a gap, and that's some 5 or 6 millimeters. So that's a good sign. That's showing that the rear has gone in and therefore the front will have gone out. So what I'm going to do is adjust this bracket so that it just kisses the tyre, and then we'll transfer it to the front and see what effect we've had. Okay, so now we can see we've got about 15 millimeters overlap the other way now. So clearly I've made the adjustment twice as much as what I needed to do. So what I'm going to do now is increase the toe in by half amount as I did last time, and that should get me somewhere near where I want to be. So another adjustment later and things are looking good. After adjustment and measuring the back, I bring it to the front and I'm just kissing the tyre on this side, and when we go to the front opposite side, you can see here the gap on the other side is around 1 millimeter. Now remember, the specification is 0 to 1.6 each side, so that's 0 to 3 millimeters, which is quite an adjustment, but I've got less than that. I'm within the range. I've adjusted both track rods simultaneously, so my steering should still be straight. So now any further adjustments will be made following test drives with very minor tweaks just to make final adjustments. But what I do know is that my toe in is now within specification. So it's a crude adjustment. It isn't for everybody, but what I have done is be able to set the toe in to within specification. In my own garage, I now have a tool I can use for the future, and I've done it for only a few dollars, as opposed to taking it to the shop where I'd be paying labour rates on top. The proof, of course, though, is in the driving. So on a test drive, the steering track's true, it doesn't pull to the left or to the right, and I have to say it's one of the biggest improvements that I've made. The car now feels light, it steers well, and feels a lot more sporty. Once again, thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed the video, please do subscribe, please do like the video, please do comment. Love reading the comments and replying and getting involved with you all. Until next time.